I reported abuse in family law court and I lost custody to the abuser.
He threatened to kill me if I ever talked about the abuse.
Did you molest your son?
California's family courts under a microscope amid concerns that judges are granting custody to abusers. One boy says he had no choice but to ignore a court order and go on the run. In tonight's special edition of True Crime Stories. Good evening, everyone. I'm Gina Silva. Tonight, a look at kids lost in the system and the family courts that critics say ignore both the law and common sense in awarding custody to parents accused of abusing their own children. Now, recently, some moms staged a protest outside of a San Diego courthouse.
We reported abuse and I lost my grandchild.
I reported abuse and lost my son.
I reported abuse and lost custody to the abuser.
Mostly it boils down to money and power and reputations. They don't want to ruin the reputation of a otherwise nice guy, and it's much easier to say that a woman is alienating or coaching her child to say they're abused.
What do we want?
Children protected.
When do we want it?
Now!
Here are some statistics that tell you more about the problem. The American Judges Association says parents who battered or physically abused their spouses got sole or shared custody in about 70% of the cases. Another smaller study shows more or less the same thing with parents accused of sexually abusing their kids. They got custody or unsupervised visitation 85% of the time. Now, joining us to help figure out why so many kids are lost in the system is Robin Sax.
Since we've started covering these stories, my phone's been ringing off the hook. My email box is full. And despite conventional wisdom where people actually think that moms are the ones favored to get custody in the system, it's untrue. The system right now are favoring abusers.
Well, it seems to have gone completely on the opposite side.
What happened is that there was like a corrective foul, if you will, just like it is in basketball, where, oh, okay, for all the years that moms were deferred and where the protocol was mom gets custody, all of a sudden judges are making up for that historic happening and now deciding, you know what, in a situation where we can't figure out what happened, or a situation where we don't have the resources to figure out what happened, or in the situation where we don't know what happened, we're going to give custody to the dad as the default.
One of the cases that we've been following here on Fox 11 is Damon's case. We've done several stories about him. Damon is now in hiding from his father, who was given full custody by a judge. Damon has been all over the internet accusing his dad of abuse.
This is Damon, and I was just making this video because I want you to know how my dad sexually abused me.
Did you molest your son? Did you touch him inappropriately? Did you have sex with him?
No, God, no. Absolutely not.
It's not a he says, she says scenario. There's evidence that shows that what I'm saying is correct.
You had a chance to interview Damon. We did the story, and I've had a lot of folks call me and ask me, and they're not sure if they believe him. They're not sure if maybe mom did coach him. What do you say to all of that?
I have two comments. First of all, there's a lot of people out there who want to know what happened. At this point today, as Damon sits here right now, I have to say, you have a kid who absolutely believes that he has been abused and has taken to the streets, is on the run. As a father, why is it that that dad still is fighting for abuse? And the behavior of the dad seeking to exercise control, threatening deprogramming camp, doing all of those things seem to me to corroborate Damon's words. That's besides the interview that I saw of Damon at the time. There were many, many telltale signs of truth from the forensic interview that actually occurred, the documentation over time. But even if we put all of that aside, you have a kid who can talk, a kid who was interviewed, and a kid who is saying what he wants, and the system does not listen to the children.
A young woman who went through a similar ordeal. She lives in New Zealand now, but as a child, she lived in Northern California. She also had to fight the courts that granted custody to her father, a well-connected attorney, a man she says physically abused her. Now, 12 years ago, when Alana Cross was 16, she wrote an article that said, "The lawyer appointed to represent my best interests ignored my reports of abuse. The therapist my father made me see was sleeping with him. The judge, an admitted long-term friend, rubber-stamped any order my father requested." At one point, Alana was sent to an institution for deprogramming. She talked to Liz Habib about her ordeal.
You felt like no one was listening to you in all of this.
In the system, the way that it's set up, I had absolutely no voice in my own case. In this case, that was really deciding the fate of my whole life. And unfortunately, the people who were supposed to be standing up for me really failed to do that. And in the end, I was placed with my abusive father, and that was the outcome.
So your father claimed that you had been, in effect, brainwashed by your mother to not like him, and so he sent you away to camp. Tell us about that.
They said that I was delusional, that I had made up the abuse stories about my father, that I had been brainwashed by my mother. So I got into this really interesting dynamic where they were saying I had been brainwashed, and my challenge was to convince them that I believed them while still holding on to the truth, because I realized very quickly that I was getting nowhere telling the truth with these people. They knew who was paying their bills, which was my father. I had to, during the day, convince them that I believed what they were saying, and at night I remember just going over in my head, okay, I know what's true. My mother loves me. My father abused me. Hold on to what's real in this world. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. No child gets up and says, I do not want to see my parent. I am terrified of my parent, unless there's a really good reason.
And for a long time there, you just lived moving from place to place to place, basically hiding, didn't you?
That's right. So I made it to Los Angeles. I looked up a very distant relative. I couldn't contact my mother because my father had sent investigators to her house and was convinced that she was behind my running away, but really it was me. After that, I was passed from sort of safe house to safe house until finally I hooked up with a family who said that I could stay longer term, which was great, and I decided I needed to turn myself into social services in Los Angeles. Luckily, Los Angeles Juvenile Court took jurisdiction of my case, and I truly believe they saved my life.
What a story. Alana had a message for Damon, and she said, we're pulling for you. Why is it that they're not listening to these kids?
Well, and that's what's so ironic. I mean, look at this story. This is Alana speaking now. She's 26 years old. She's talking in her own words. What's ending up happening to these children is they're ending up with no parent. They're forced to take care of themselves. They have to hit the street. They're missing out on educational opportunities. And as a parent, I'm a mom. I'm sitting here thinking, you know what? At some point, you have to say, I need to do what's best for my child. And sometimes what may be best for my child may be listening to what they're actually saying. And that's my message to these abusers out there, or to the ones who even think that they're falsely being abused. If you have any care for your kid, you wouldn't want them in this situation.
Alana eventually won her case, but what about Damon? He can't go to school this fall because he's in hiding. His dad has offered to give him legal emancipation, but Damon is afraid it's a trick and he'll be sent to a deprogramming camp himself.
You found out through court documents, actually, that your dad had an intention to send you to some sort of deprogramming camp. He says that he was going to actually send you to a tennis camp.
He tried to send me to a deprogramming camp where they are known for using methods that you can't even use on prisoners of war to get kids to recant the abuse.
He says there's really only one way out for him, and that's emancipation, that you won't come out of hiding to do the emancipation.
Even if my dad and my mom both give consent forms, and even if the DA lends support, the judge could still say, no, you have to go back with your father.
So he has absolutely no trust for the prosecutors or for anybody involved, or his dad.
Well, Damon is in a conundrum, and equally in conundrums are a lot of times parents who believe that their kid is being abused, and they're faced with asking themselves the question, well, if this is what's going on in the courts, I want to tell someone, but if I tell someone, I may be faced with losing custody of my kid. And then
you advised your clients not to say something.
Right. There have been cases where I've had a case of a 3-year-old where there was no proof. It was going to be touching. You weren't going to have proof, by the way. It was an over-the-clothes touching where there wouldn't have been DNA. No one sexually assaults people where there's eyewitnesses. Many people don't confess to these types of things. And I actually had to advise my client and say, listen, you could end up losing custody by telling the courts. And then the great irony is that if it's determined at some other point that there was abuse, that same person who was in fear of losing custody could also be charged with fail to protect. So you're
punished either way.
Either way.
It makes no sense. We've heard a lot about judges and courts that left kids with no voice, but there are judges here in LA County trying to improve things, like Judge Michael Nash, presiding judge of LA's Juvenile Dependency Court. Robin asked him about the many problems facing the system.
The type of work that is done is often superficial at best.
Are we in red alert times for the Department of Children and Family Services and the Dependency Court? Are we in a crisis?
Yes, we have always been in a crisis mode. We'll always be in a crisis mode until we have no children left in this system. I believe that transparency is important for this system so the public will have a better understanding of what works.
Now, Judge Nash praised the dedicated workers in the court and DCFS. He told us the amazing thing is that what we do it as well as we do, but unfortunately, it's clearly not good enough. Now, we did an interview with a judge who also believes that they've been told, be suspicious of women.
I think that that's a prevailing attitude. I think that there's fathers' rights movements have gained a lot of gusto. I think that they've come across with this pseudo-scientific words called Parental Alienation Syndrome, which has no scientific backing whatsoever, but courts find it to be a sexy kind of label and kind of have hung on to it. But just like Sandusky, just like Paterno has shed light on sexual abuse and the fact that, ladies and gentlemen, it really does exist, hopefully by covering this story and looking at these cases, people will see that this does really exist.
Talk about it, yes. Here's an interesting fact about our family court system. A study from a Massachusetts Supreme Court task force discovered that battered women who allege abuse are more likely to lose custody of their children. Joining us now to discuss the whole issue of kids lost in the system is Kathleen Russell of the Center for Judicial Excellence. Thank you so much for joining us. How is that so? If you report the abuse, you are likely to lose your child?
That is correct, Gina. It's a sad reality, but it is routinely happening in America's family courts.
And what can moms do?
They need to be very careful before they step into family court, and we advise folks if they have any ability to go to a private mediator and avoid the court system altogether, they should do that. Obviously, if they're dealing with an ex-spouse who is a batterer or is molesting the children, that is a difficult situation. And many times the courts are being unwittingly used by the abuser to continue to perpetrate abuse against the protective parent.
See, this is so scary to me because I think of the courts as a fair place. You go there if you have a problem and the judge is supposed to be fair. Doesn't seem the case.
Not at all. And unfortunately, it's not about the facts of the case. It's about who you know and how much money you have. And our organization and others like us around the country have been hearing a tsunami of these stories for the last 10 to 20 years. And it's only getting worse. It is an epidemic. And there are a number of reasons for why this is happening.
And you actually go through a process to vet these cases. Someone who just says, hey, custody was given to the abuser. You don't just say, okay, and now we're going to go advocate for you. What kind of stuff do you do to verify and make sure the record is how it is so that when you're coming out and talking about cases like Damon or Alana, that people know that this is actually true?
Sure. No, we work with attorneys. There are a couple of wonderful attorneys in different places around the country who are working to try to ensure that children are better protected in the system. And there are organizations that we work with as well that carefully vet these cases who are attorneys. And we look at the court transcripts and the records and medical records. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen medical reports from ERs that say the child should not be returned to the father. And then the court is insisting if you do not let your child go with the father this weekend, you are going to lose your parenting time
are they not looking at those court records? Right. Are they not looking at those medical records?
In many cases, they're not. In many cases, they suppress that evidence or it is never reviewed by the judge. Part of the problem is there are all these court professionals who are being appointed by the judge to meet with the families, and these folks are not trained. We did an audit of 2 county family courts that this California state auditor did, which showed what we knew to be true, which is these people who are being empowered to make decisions about where children are going to live the rest of their lives don't even have basic training in domestic violence detection or in child abuse, even though California state law and many other states require them to be trained. They're simply not.
And the judges are depending on these people who don't know what to do.
Right. And the other really difficult part of this for people to understand is that there's a financial incentive for these court appointees to keep the cases going. There's no financial incentive to settle these cases. And so a lot of times they know if a child is put with the alleged abuser, that safe protective parent is going to come back to court again and again. And we speak to people who spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to protect their child from abuse.
Thank you so much for coming out and talking to us, Kathleen. Now, you can find out more on the issue of family courts. Visit Kathleen's website, centerforjudicialexcellence.org, or go to our website at myfoxla.com and do a search for Lost in the System. Now, ladies, one of the things about Damon's story, the judge wrote out there that even if he was being molested, he was supposed to go back to his father. How do we stop that from happening again?
Yeah, it's extremely common. There is hope on the horizon, though. The Cummings Foundation for Behavioral Health is doing a nationwide mailing to every member of Congress, every Chief Justice, and every governor's office, every law school, and a number of the psychology schools in the country about the broken family court system. It's unprecedented to have this sort of educational book being distributed to so many top elected and legal officials. So we're hopeful that once the word gets out and there is a recognition of this broken system, that we can then work on the solutions for fixing it.
And we need to hear the stories. We want your stories. You need to talk about it. You need to tell people. The more people talk about it, just like in sexual abuse, a la Paterno, a la Sandusky, the more you talk, the more people understand, and the more we can make change.
Absolutely. We got to keep talking about it. We hope that we've helped you understand some of the issues surrounding family court and what some people are doing to keep kids from being abused by the system. Thank you so much for watching.